On the morning of May 23, 1934, as six armed men waited in ambush along a quiet rural road in Beanville Parish, Louisiana, the story of America's most famous criminal couple was about to come to an end. Former Texas Ranger Frank Hammer had finally reached his target after a relentless 100-day pursuit, but this final confrontation would be far bloodier than even he had anticipated. So why did this experienced lawman need 167 bullets to stop Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow?
My name is Frank Hammer. I am 49 years old, and I spent 27 years of my life as a Texas Ranger. In my lifetime, I have faced hundreds of criminals, been in dozens of gunfights, but none had given me as much trouble as Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. I had retired in February 1934, wanting to live a quiet life with my wife at our home in Austin. But when Lee Simmons, head of the Texas Highway Patrol, called me back for a special assignment, I knew my reckoning with this duo was inevitable. "Frank, you're the only one who can finish this job," Simmons had said on that cold February day. "I'm giving you full authority to stop Bonnie and Clyde." On his desk were photographs, Raymond Hamilton, Henry Methvin, and others who had escaped from Eastham Prison Farm. But the real target was clear: Clyde Barrow and his lover, Bonnie Parker. This job was not personal, it was professional. But their latest attacks in Texas, especially the murder of two young patrolmen, Edward Wheeler and H.D. Murphy in Grapevine, had taken things to an entirely different level. These boys had actually approached them to talk, but Clyde's Thompson submachine gun had not given them that opportunity. Now this was not just a capture operation, it was a quest for revenge. My first task was to know them. I studied their files for days. Clyde Barrow, born in 1909, a child of a poor family from Dallas's Cement City neighborhood. He had started stealing at a young age, committed his first serious crime at 19. Bonnie Parker, born in 1910, also from Dallas. She had married while still in high school, and when her husband went to prison, her life was turned upside down. Meeting Clyde in 1930 had sealed both their fates. The pursuit began in March 1934. Together with my partner, Manny Galt, we launched a systematic hunt in the Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana triangle. This was not an ordinary criminal chase. Clyde Barrow was on the FBI's public enemy list and was smart enough to keep us constantly one step behind. He used his Ford V8 like an extension of his own body, able to go 90 miles per hour, even on sharp turns. Bonnie was not just a moll, she knew how to use weapons, and was as determined as Clyde. In the first weeks, I began studying their movement patterns in Oklahoma. Clyde's father, Henry Barrow, ran a gas station in Dallas, and according to intelligence reports, he was in regular contact with his son. Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, was also waiting for her daughter at her home in West Dallas, while FBI agents kept constant watch around the house. These family ties were their greatest weakness. No matter how careful Clyde was, I knew he missed his mother's home-cooked beans and cornbread. Throughout April, we followed their trail. Starting from Joplin, Missouri, they were moving south. Every time we were one step behind. Items left in a motel room, half-eaten meals, still warm coffee cups. We were always a few hours late. Clyde had a system: never stay in the same place for more than 2 nights, never use main roads, always plan 3 different escape routes, and never use the same gas station twice. In early May, we came across a hot lead in Louisiana. Henry Methvin's family lived in Beanville Parish, and according to intelligence reports, Bonnie and Clyde came here regularly. Methvin's father, Ivan, operated a small farm on a rural road. The plan took shape. We would convince Ivan to cooperate, and in exchange for his son's pardon, he would provide information about Bonnie and Clyde's arrival. Our first conversation with Ivan Methvin took place on May 20th. He was a hard farmer in his 50s, with a sunburned face and calloused hands. He was devastated seeing what had happened to his son. "Mr. Hammer," he said in a trembling voice, "Henry was a good boy. But everything changed after he met this Clyde. Now he's on the FBI's most wanted list. He's tarnished our family's name. Ivan, I said, if you help us, I can provide your son with a chance for pardon. But I need to know where Bonnie and Clyde are. They'll come tomorrow morning, he said, looking down at the ground. They come every Sunday, visit his mother. They use the Sailors Creek Road, around 8 in the morning. On the night of May 22nd, we completed our preparations. Besides me, there were 5 other men. Manny Galt, Dallas County Deputy Ted Hinton, Bienville Parish Deputy Prentice Oakley, Bob Alcorn, from the Louisiana Highway Patrol, and local Sheriff's Deputy Henderson Jordan. They were all experienced, reliable men, but none were prepared for the intensity of the approaching confrontation. We carefully chose our positions. Sailors Creek Road was a narrow rural road, winding through pine forests. There were dense bushes and ditches on both sides of the road. There was a straight section about 2 miles long that would be ideal. We left Ivan Methvin's truck by the roadside, as if it had broken down. This would be the bait to make Bonnie and Clyde stop. Throughout the night, we took our positions. Manny and I hid among the bushes on the north side of the road. Ted Hinton was on the south side. Oakley and the others were in ambush at strategic points. The air was humid and hot, a typical Louisiana spring night. Mosquitoes and bugs were bothersome, but no one moved. When the first light of dawn began to appear, tension reached its peak. At 9:15, we heard an engine sound in the distance. My heartbeat quickened, but it was just an ordinary farmer's pickup truck. In the next half hour, several more vehicles passed, all innocent passengers. At 9:40, a black sedan passing Ivan Methvin's truck caught my attention. But it was not speeding, and there was only an elderly couple inside. At 9:50, a familiar engine sound approached from the south. I immediately recognized the characteristic sound of a Ford V8. My heart began to pound. Looking through the bushes, I saw Clyde's known V8 in light gray color. There were 2 people inside. The vehicle slowed down when it saw Ivan's truck. Everything was going according to plan. But what I noticed at that moment put me on alert. Clyde had a Thompson submachine gun in his lap, and Bonnie had a short-barreled shotgun in her hand. These were not ordinary criminals carrying just pistols. This was a fully equipped war machine. The car stopped. Clyde leaned out the window and called out, "Hey, Ivan, having problems?" The voice was familiar, but there was tension underneath. This man was always on edge, paranoid and suspicious. Ivan responded, as planned. The truck broke down. "Frank, can you help me a little?" Clyde hesitated. At that moment, Bonnie whispered something. Clyde's facial expression changed. Alarm was evident. Maybe he had noticed something. Maybe his instincts had kicked in. Now or never, I thought. If they decided to flee, we would never get this opportunity again. "Stop, hands up," I shouted as I emerged from the bushes. At the same time, 5 other men appeared, but Clyde's reflexes were lightning fast. The moment he raised the Thompson, chaos began. The first shots came from them. Clyde's Thompson could fire 600 rounds per minute, and he was firing with full force. Bonnie's shotgun also exploded. A hail of bullets surrounded the area. We had to respond. Our Winchester .35s, Remington .3006s, and Browning automatic rifles emptied 167 rounds within minutes. The intensity of the sound was so great that ears were ringing. Gunpowder smoke covered everything. The firefight lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt like it had lasted for hours. Clyde was the first to be hit. A bullet had lodged in his chest, but he was still firing. Bonnie was screaming, but she had not dropped her weapon. The Ford V8's metal body was being riddled with holes under the hail of bullets. Finally, silence fell. When the gunpowder smoke cleared, a terrible scene was revealed. The Ford V8 was unrecognizable. Glass fragments, blood, and metal fragments covered everything. Bonnie and Clyde were motionless inside their vehicle. We slowly approached. Clyde was leaning forward at the steering wheel, his eyes open, but staring blankly. Bonnie had fallen to her right side in her seat, her blonde hair stained with blood. They were both 23 years old. Inside their vehicle, they had stayed together until their final moments. Clyde's right hand was still on the steering wheel. His left hand was touching Bonnie's shoulder. This small gesture was silent testimony that their love had lasted until the very last minute. Ted Hinton began to cry. "I knew her since childhood," he said in a broken voice. "Bonnie Elizabeth Parker, from West Dallas. She was a beautiful girl. She wrote poetry. How did she end up like this?" When we examined their vehicle, what we found surprised us. In the trunk were 3 Thompson submachine guns, 6 automatic pistols, 3,000 rounds of ammunition, a collection of stolen license plates, and $507 in cash. But what caught my attention most was the notebook in Bonnie's purse. It contained poems, especially the poem titled The Story of Bonnie and Clyde. You've read the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde. These lines showed how they had created their own legend. Bonnie and Clyde were not just criminals, they were also the creators of their own mythology. When we brought their bodies to Arcadia, the townspeople had poured into the streets. Some looked with curiosity, some with fear, and some were pleased that justice had been served. But I felt a strange emptiness inside. In my 27-year career, I had faced hundreds of criminals, but none were as tragic as Bonnie and Clyde. Among the people, many saw them as romantic rebels, especially the younger generation. The despair created by the Great Depression had turned these 2 young criminals into folk heroes. While banks were evicting people from their homes, Bonnie and Clyde were robbing banks. Paradoxically, they had become symbols of hope for many people. When I returned to my home in Austin that evening, my wife Gladys met me at the door. She understood everything from my face. "Is it over, Frank?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but I think this ending is not the kind I wanted." I could not sleep that night. I kept thinking about Bonnie's poems, Clyde's final look, Ivan Methvin's guilt, Ted Hinton's tears. These were not just criminals, they were children of a lost generation, victims of the Great Depression, young people whose dreams had been stolen. But in the end, the law was the law. They had killed 13 people, most of them innocent police officers and civilians. My job was to ensure justice, not sentimentality. Still, those 167 bullets had not only killed 2 young people, they had also given birth to a legend.
Frank Hammer's final operation had not only stopped the criminals, but had also brought an end to an era. The death of Bonnie and Clyde marked the breaking point of the crime wave of the early 1930s, but their story would continue to live on, not just as outlaws, but as enduring symbols of American popular culture. So what do you think? Could this tragic end have been avoided, or was Bonnie and Clyde's fate sealed with those 167 bullets?